Hilchas Gneivah Pedig Shmini. Now in Pedig Zayin we learned the dinim of midas. There knows you started off that if a person is sheikel with midas chaseres or with maznayim chaseres, knows a person makes false measurements in weights or in measurements of measuring cups. So that's a special issur. In other words, besides the issur of Gneivah, that you're taking something shleik bin, in other words, you're charging him for more and you're giving him less. You're basically stealing money from him. There's a special issur of the fact that you're stealing money through having false measurements. And as the Rambam says at the end, that kosher ancient shel midas, yosem ancient shel arayas, and he writes kol hakefer mitzvahs midas is kekefer mitzvahs mitzrayim. It's very severe, this inyan of mitzvahs midas. Mitzvahs midas means that you shouldn't sell someone something with wrong measurements. That's the issur. The issur to sell someone something with wrong measurements. Now there's a mitzvah saseh to make sure that your measurements are right. So there was a leisasa, the Rambam first mentioned the leisasa of taking something from someone with wrong measurements, and selling him something with wrong scales or wrong measurements. And now there's a special din that you have to make the scales proper. Perek Shmini. Mitzvah saseh letzadik hamaznayim v'hamishkolis v'hamidis yofi yofa. That a person should make sure that the scales and the weights that you put on the scales and the measuring cups, it should be yofi yofa uledaktik b'cheshbeinam b'shas asiyosam. You should be very exact. When you make it, you should make sure they should be exact. Shenamar meiznit tzedek v'gem. It has to be meiznit tzedek v'in tzedek yiluch. It has to be exact. V'chein b'midas hakarka. As weißt du, is b'negea dvarim metaltalin, you weigh or you measure. So then you have measuring cups, or scales or weights. But when you measure karka, you measure it with a rope. So over here, the question is you have to measure it properly and also know how to measure. Because let's say you're dividing a piece of property and you're giving one half and the other one half. Now a piece of property is not really so exact. It's not like an exact triangle, rectangle, so you just cut it in half. In other words, there's different pieces sticking out, so you have to know how much this person is getting the area and that's how much this person is going the area. So that's the cheshbon of figuring out midas hakarka. V'chein b'midas hakarka tzorech ledaktik b'cheshbon meshichas hakarka. You have to be exact in the cheshbon of meshichas hakarka al pi ha'ikrim ha'misborim b'kisvei hagematria. In other words, in those svarim which are involved in kisvei hagematria to teach how to measure karka, to geometry and different various fractions, and knowing how to measure karka. So that you have to know those ikrim. Shafilu malei etzbim min hakarka. Even though if one gets a little bit less, like a finger breadth, less l'chur is very little. So l'chur l'maynaf keminis who say no rei neisek kiili himalei hakarkim, as if it was filled with saffron. In other words, something which is very expensive to grow. In other words, a piece of karka, any little piece of karka, we consider very important, and therefore you have to be medaktik b'cheshbon to make sure that each one gets the right exact amount that he's supposed to get. Now that's b'chlal, the pashtus, when you're selling someone a piece of karka, you make up how much you're selling, and al derech zeh, if you have shutzim that are dividing a karka, each one has to get an equal part. Now then there's another din when you need to know, beis, arba amas asmucha lecharitz. You have an amas hamayim that are going through the fields, and the din is you're now let a plant next to this charitz, next to this channel of water which is going through the fields, because through planting over there, so you're going to ruin the earth over there, it's going to become soft, and then the earth may go into the amas hamayim and ruin the amas hamayim. So therefore the takana was that you shouldn't plant within arba amas next to the charitz. So when you want to know how much aren't you allowed to plant, so that's mizalzel b'mshichasim. You're mizalzel, in other words, you don't have to be so exact. In other words, since it's something which is like amongst the people, it's amongst the people that we want that each person should stay away 4 amas in order to make sure that the amas hamayim stays intact. So generally, people are moichel each other. Because as long as it's basically 4 amas, even if it's not punkt 4 amas, so that's enough. So therefore, mizalzel b'mshichasim. V'hasmuchim l'svas hanor, and the area which is next to the svas hanor, which we said also before, that you're not allowed to plant trees over there because people have to come in order to schlep in the svina, so they have to have enough room to be able to schlep the svina. Is ein meshchanes and klal. B'chlal you don't measure it. Mepnei she'ein shel bnei reshus harabim. It's the area which belongs to the reshus harabim, the area which is al svas hanor. So it's not a private thing that you're giving to a private person. And therefore, the area that belongs to Reshus Harabim, so that area you go according to how it's assessed, how much is necessary in order to be able to pull the Sfina in. That's how the Rabbim, so to speak, the people that stand in the place of the Rabbim, they assess how much is necessary in order for the people to be able to pull in their sfinas. In that area, you're not allowed to plant any trees. Now, halacha gimel, v'hamoided the sakarka. When a person measures karka, knows you're dividing a piece of karka to two parts. You're giving each one part. So you have to measure. So let's say you measure with a rope. You see how many times this rope goes in through this karka, and then you measure the other side also with the rope. And mainly you make sure that it should be equal measurements with this rope. Now the question is the size of the rope. The passion, you have a rope, the same rope, the same. So you have 5 rope lengths, and on the other side you also have 5 rope lengths. But if you'll measure one side during the winter, and the other side you'll measure during the summer, so during the winter the rope is longer. So the person that's getting measured during the winter will get a longer piece. Mashenkin during the summer, so things dry out, so Mamela contract, and therefore it'll be shorter the rope. So Mamela will come out that the person that got measured during the summer really got a smaller amount than the person that got measured during the winter. So Mamela, that's why you can't do that. That's what he says. Someone that measures karka, is measuring karka to divide a piece of karka for 2 people, is liyamud le'echad meisacham or le'echad meisachsham. For one, he's going to measure during the summer, the other one during the winter. Why? Meishachevel miskatzev meisacham. During the summer, the rope becomes smaller. So that's why it's a problem, because if you're going to use the same rope, and for this one you're going to use in the winter, and this one is going to use in the summer, so the one that got measured in the winter will have a bigger portion. This whole din is only by a rope. In Madad Bekana, if you didn't use a rope, but you used a big stick, Ebishal Shel Shel Barzal, you use the iron chain, so that doesn't contract, doesn't expand. There's no difference when you measure it, the winter and the summer, because it'll always be the same size. Halacha Daled, Ein Eisen Mishkoles, Leishel Barzal, V'leishel Eferes, V'leishel Shar Matchis Keila. In other words, the weights that you're going to put on the scale in order to measure something. So you have a weight. So that weight shouldn't be made out of metal, out of iron, or a ferrous is lead. Why? Because they become rusty, and once they become rusty, so they become less weight, and therefore, so you're going to be measuring it with something that says one weight. And reality, right now, it's already less. You use from a hard stone that stone remains, a hard piece of stone, or glass, a precious stone. These are things which don't erode, they don't become less, and therefore they'll remain intact. Whatever weight you establish, that's the weight that it'll remain. Halacha hey. Ein oisen is hamachak. A machak is the piece of wood. If you have, let's say, a bowl, you fill something into a bowl that you're selling, and you're selling, let's say, a bowl of that, or whatever the measurement of that cup is. And now, but the measure, when you pour, let's say you'll pour flour into a cup. So you're selling him a cup of flour. But lepel, when you pour it into the cup, it's heaping over. There's like a heap over the cup. So, and you don't really have to sell him with the heap over the cup. You're just selling him a flat cup. So mainly you have to get a piece of wood or something in order to take off what's going on top, what's the mound on top of the cup, in order that it should have an exact cup. Now, if you have a very light thing taking off this mound, so Vaistai, some of it will remain, and therefore the moicher will be giving more than he really has to give away. If you have something very heavy, so Vaistai is a concern that it's going to go down even lower, and the lekech will get less. So therefore you have to have something which is not very light, not very heavy. That's what he's saying here. I'm not 100% sure that tzir advarim, because l'chura, if it's on top, or might not come in if it's heavy or light, but Vaistai is such a din. Halacha hey. Ein oisim es hamachak, which is that piece that you use in order to straighten things out on top. Leishal dalas, not something that's made out of gourd, let's say a piece of gourd that's dried out, because mipnei shomekel is very light, so therefore you're not going to completely take off that heap which is on top of the keli. When also leishal matras, don't use metal, mipnei shomach, but it's very heavy. Vices is going to go into the keli, and therefore when you're going to push it off, you're going to push off part of the keli. Different types of wood, a wood that comes out of an olive tree or of a nut tree or of a shikma, which is a type of date tree, and a type of fig tree rather, another type of tree. Notice the wood, it's not too light, it's not too heavy, and that's punct right. Halacha vov. Ein oisen es hamachak, tzidi echad kotzer, v'tzidi echad over. One side should be thin, and the other side should be thick, because they flatten it differently, and therefore the tzada of doesn't flatten it that much. So therefore, it ends up being a little bit of a heap. In other words, you don't flatten it out so well. Mashenkin, the part that's thin, flattens out better. The Maggid Mishnah says there's a concern that he's going to have this measuring, this stick which flattens things out on top of the measuring cup, and that'll be Mashal, when he'll want to buy, he'll use the thick one, because the thick one won't really take off so much, so he's going to end up buying more. When he's going to want to sell, he's going to use the thin one, and that's going to take off more. So maybe it's going to come out that he'll be able to buy with the part that's better for him, and he'll be able to sell with the part that's better for him. So therefore, you shouldn't have such a machak which sidi echad kotzer, but sidi echad over. And v'leyimchik ma'at ma'at, when you start moving it across that keli, you shouldn't go slowly. Because Vaistis, when you do it slowly, I don't understand the Metzias, when you do it slowly, you don't completely take it off. You mafchisa lemecher, the mecher loses. And also, v'leyimchik basachas, you shouldn't do it with one shot. You should do it in a more regular manner. You shouldn't do it very fast across, because then it comes off a lot. You shouldn't do it very slowly, because it comes out off very little, and therefore you're mafchisa lemecher, so it comes out that we're talking about when you're selling over here. So memela you're mafchisa lemecher, because memela a lot of it is, you're not really taking off the heaping part. So therefore what you should do is in a regular amount. This machak should be used in a regular amount. The metzias of it, I don't understand exactly how it works. Halacha zayin, ein teimnas hamishkolas b'melach k'dei sheyivchasu. When you put the weight into salt, so that causes that the weight should corrode, and therefore it become less. So therefore you're taking this weight, and officially the weight, let's say, is a pound. In reality, because it was sitting in salt, so therefore it became less than a pound, and you're selling the customer something, which officially you're selling him the weight of a pound, but it's not a pound. And also, that when a person goes ahead and pours something which is lach, so you shouldn't pour in a way that, when you pour something, so it becomes a foam on top, and therefore it's not really just going to go away, but it's not really full. The keli looks full, but it's not really full. So when you pour, you have to pour slowly in order not to make that foam on top when you pour. Even though it was a very small midah, and l'churi only like taking away a little bit. The Torah was very makbar on midah. Shnema uvam surah. Vehi midah ktana, which is achas mishleishim alug. It's a very small midah, which is a 33rd of a lug. So a lug, a revius halug is what we call a revius. Is a revius halug. So and this is a fourth of a lug, and this is a 33rd of a lug. So in Mela, so it's a very, very small midah. Halacha ches. Meichri ashoshe shel barzel, those that are selling, that's the scrap metal ukiyetzaben, is tzorich liyes chut hamaznayim she'oiches hashekel biyodei totally be'aver shleisha tvachim. So you have a scale. Now that scale is made up of a rod across. But you have a rod that goes across, that goes horizontal, and now from that rod hangs like two pans on their whatever, on strings or on chains, those two pans, and one pan you put the weight, and the other pan you put the item which you're weighing with, and then you make sure that they should be straight. When they're straight, you know that this is that weight. That's how you weigh it. Now you hold on top of the rod, the horizontal rod, you have a chain or a rope, and you hold it. So that rope has to be held 3 tvachim above the rod in order for things to work out properly. So hamichutam is 9, that chain or that rope that you're holding the scale with. She'oiches hashekel biyadi, the person that's weighing it is holding with his hands. It should be totally ba'aver shleisha tvachim. It should be coming down from his hand 3 tvachim until the rod. And also, ugvayim in the shleisha tvachim. In other words, those pans that are hanging from the rod, they have to be above the ground 3 tvachim. Because we're afraid that if you're going to have something that's heavy, and it's going to be very close to the ground, so it may hit the ground, something may fall off. In other words, you want it to be very clearly away from the ground. It should be at least 3 tvachim above the ground. And you also want that this scale should be a straight scale. Should be, since we're dealing with something that's heavy, it should be hanging 3 tvachim from where you're holding it, and then there should be the scale, and then it should be the bottom of the scale also should be 3 tvachim above the ground. That's what he's saying. Chutam iznayim. Tzarech li is chutam iznayim she'eches hashekel biyodi. We're talking about scrap metal, which are like pretty heavy things. Should be totally ba'aver shleisha tvachim. Should be hanging in the air, shleisha tvachim knows from your hand until that rod of the knei iznayim. And also gveim and ora shleisha tvachim should be above the ground 3 tvachim. V'oirech knei iznayim v'oirech hachutim should be shnei masa tefach. So the length of that rod and also the length of those chutim, which are going down onto the pans. You have the pans hanging from the rod, which on one pan you're going to put the weight, and the other pan you're going to put whatever you're weighing with. So they should be 12 tvach. They should be 12 tvach long. That's talking about the miznayim of the mechri ashoshi shel barzel, which are heavier things. Now miznayim shel mechri tzemer v'shel mechri schuches, those people that are selling wool or selling glass, is here erech hachutim shein tluim beishnei tvachim. They don't have to be so long. They could be only 2 tvachim long. And ugveim menor, it's also shnei tvachim because they're not so heavy. And v'akon and v'achutim also don't have to be so long. They could be arkon tisha tvachim. So instead of 12 tvachim, so they could be 9 tvachim. Now maznayim shel chenveni v'shel balabayis. The maznayim of the chenveni and the balabayis, which is also don't do things that are very heavy. We're not talking about heavy weights. Is here erech hachut shein tluyim beitefach, as opposed to we first started with 3 tvachim. When the Gea Shosher Shel Barzel, when we came to the Mechrit Tzemer, we spoke about 2 tvachim, and now we're speaking about a tefach. Miznayim shel chenvin shel balabayis ye'erech hachut shein tluyim beitefach ugveim in haaretz tefach, and v'hakon and v'achutim is arkon 6 tvachim. So again, we had 3 tvachim, 2 tvachim, and 1 tefach, and we had 12 tvachim, 9 tvachim, and 6 tvachim. Halacha Yudalef. Now hachut shetelun be'apelis. Now apelis is a different type of scale. It's a scale. Whereas you have a scale which is miznayim, which you have the weight on one side, and then you have whatever you're weighing against it on the other side. So that's a regular scale. Then you have a pelis, which is a scale which also have a weight, but depending on where you put the weight on the rod, that's how you measure things. In other words, you don't measure things like you have a straight weight. In other words, and one is heavy. They're both like equally apart from the middle part. And Mele, you know what the weight is. They're equal to each other. Mashenkin over here, you measure the weight according to those. If it's closer, let's say if you have a weight which is closer to the middle, so in order for things to stand straight, it doesn't have to be so heavy. In other words, you have something which is not so heavy, which will also keep it straight together with that weight because that weight is closer to the middle. So depending on how far the weight is from the item, that'll determine its weight. So the weight is determined not so much by, in other words, that they're equally far from the middle and therefore they have to be the same weight, but rather according to the distance of the weight from the rod, from the middle of this rod, that'll determine the weight. So a pellis is a smaller thing because it's smaller. Because it's a smaller weight. Is a chut shetelem be'apellis, v'chein chut miznayim shel zov, or v'shel mechri argomentev, which are also, we're dealing with things that are very edel, and therefore they're not things that weigh very much. They don't weigh that much. We're weighing things that are very light, but the weight is not so strong. So over here is arche shalosh boys. Before we said we had an oirech of a tefach, and now we're saying we can have an oirech of something which is only shalosh boys, which is less than a tefach. On the gveim menor, it's also shalosh voice. There's no size how big the pella should be, and also how big the chutim which you hang the pan from the pellets also should be. On that, there's no shear. There's no shear. Halacha Yud Beis. So that's the thing. So we're learning over here that you have to have exact measurements. But Kitzur, we learn over here you have to have exact measurements. And you have to make sure that the thing that you're using in order to straighten things out also should be in a way that it shouldn't be cheating, not the mecher, not the lekeach. And you have to make sure that the weights remain right. It shouldn't be melach. And then also when you make the weights, when you're holding the weights, it has to be held in such a way that also if no one's going to be fooled over here, things will be proper. Halacha Yud Beis. Menayin shechayev hamoicher lachriya lo lekeach beish shekelei. You're selling an item, So you have to make sure to set the exact weight. When the two sides are equal, that's when they're the right weight. But here we're saying no, that there's a chiyuv lachriach lekeh. When you're weighing for him, you should give him a little extra. In other words, it should be a little bit more on the side of the lekeh. In other words, you have a weight, so you have the weight, and then you have the item. So they shouldn't be exactly equal. The item, the weight, the item that you're going for the weight should be a little bit going down onto to the side of the item which you're weighing against the weight. Shnamar Evan Shlema v'tzedek yelecha. So we learn out, even though it's an Evan Shlema, but it still be v'tzedek. There should be v'tzadik. Amrotei tzadik mishalecha v'tein la. In other words, give away more than you actually have to give. V'kama, how much do you have to give away? Is belach, when we're dealing with you're selling something lach, is echad lemeya. You give 100th. Or biyavish, when you're giving something that's dry goods, not lach, so then it's echad la'arba meyas, 1 out of 400. Ketzah. Mocher le'eser litra lach. Now, litra is a measurement of weight. If you sold him something that's liquid, and that should be a weight of eser litra, so then nesli girumim echad me'asara b'litra. So you have to give him a tenth of a litra. Tenth of a litra is 100th of what you're selling. V'machem le'esrim litrim yavish, v'machem le'esrim litrim yavish. But if you're selling him something which is yavish, and over there we said it's 1/400th, is nesli girum of echad me'esrim b'litra. So then you give him a 20th of a litra. When you're selling him something that's liquid, you have to give him 100th of that liquid more. And if you're giving him something that's dry, not liquid, something dry, solid, so then you have to give him a 400th. Where the minhag is to sell exact. So here we're saying the halach is no, you have to be lachriya l'lekech to give him a little extra. How much extra? Either 100th or a 400th. In other words, you're basically, when you weigh it exact. But Masha'ike, you're telling the Rambam is telling us that besides the fact that you're weighing it exact, you have to add something. How much should you ask? You should add either a tenth of a litra, or you should add either 100th. Either a hundredth of the lach, or a 400th of the yavish. But in makom that they're noego lachriya, which means that the weight, you have the weight go down. If you have it, the weight's equal. So you say you weigh them right. Now let's give them some extra. What's extra? Give them the extra echad, either a hundredth of what you weighed. Let's say if it was 10 litra, which is a weight. A litra is a weight. So it was 10 litra, so now you give him a tenth of a litra extra. So you go and you weigh, you gave him the 10 litra, and now you go and you weigh another tenth of a litra in order to know to give him more. Masha'inkin, when you chatchila, the minhag is lachriya, so you're machriya. So then it's chayiv lachriya li tefach, which sounds really quite a bit. In other words, that it should be going down a tefach towards the size of the lekech. In other words, you have a weight, then you have the product which you're giving to the lekech, so that should be going down a tefach above of where the weight of the weight is. That's what you should give extra to the lekech. So even though you have a pound of a weight, it's a pound, and then you have on the other side the schera which you're weighing. So you say if they're straight, so then you're giving them the exact. It should be going down towards the side of the lekech more. You're giving him more. Now hoya sheikaloi esolitzu. You were giving him esolitzu. And now this is b'makim shenago lachriya. Every time you're going to weigh me a liter and you'll make achra. No, el shekel asara v'asachas and v'hechra echad l'kulam. See, if you're going according to the echad mimeya or echad mi'arba meya, so it makes no difference if you're doing it b'vasachas l'chura or you're doing it b'zachar zeh. Masha'enkin, if you're doing it with achra shenago lachriya, so then it's negeya, because it's nagal achriya. He wants it should be achra each time. Saying no, what do achra each time? We're going to have one achra. The achra is going to be at the end. Even though the chura, even if the achra is at the end and the achra is a tefach on the end, so the chura sof kol sof, it's the same amount. In other words, make the cheshbon. If you make the cheshbon, the chura, it's always the same amount, even if it's achra of a tefach. But it's a little bit more, regardless of what's going on the other side. The achra of the tefach is going to be curled the same thing. It's going to be curled the same thing, l'chura. The Smar really echsid. He says, but sof kol sof, each time you add a little bit extra. You little bit extra. You don't only give the tefach, you give a little more than the tefach. And that's the same din on next din. Halacha tezayin, mokim shenago lomed bedaka. When you usually measure things, we're not talking about weights, we're talking about measuring things in smaller cups, is liyomed begasa. You shouldn't go and measure in bigger cups. Because lepel, when you measure in smaller cups, and those the minig is to measure in smaller cups. So mele, there's achra each time you measure. Mashenkin, if it's in a bigger cup, there'll only be one achra. No, you'll always give a little extra. So you'll give a little extra from the gasa, but you're not over. It's a little extra from the gasa is not the same amount like a little extra each time you use the gasa. Aber fakert begasa, if the minig is to use the gasa, is liyomid bedaka. Why? Because you don't want people to, you want people to know clearly what the minig amokim is. So Memela, if people are going to see that you're using something which is not the minig amokim, they may get the wrong impression that that is the minig amokim. So in order for that to happen, so we want that the business people should always do the minig amokim. And therefore people shouldn't get confused what the minig is. And al that is a limchek. Let's say the minig is to straighten things out on the top. Is layig the shviyes dam. What she'll say, normally people really sell a flat, the thing should be flat on top of this measuring keli. But I'm going to sell it to you a heaping measuring keli, and I'll charge you extra. The problem is, what's wrong? They're both agreeing. I'm selling a heaping measuring keli, and you're going to pay me for it. But lepel, the problem is that people are going to see me selling you a heaping measuring keli, and they'll think the seder is that this measuring keli is called a heaping measuring keli, and we don't want people to know this. Or fakert, v'chenim nagol ligdish. If the minig is to make a heaping measuring keli, is leyimchik. Don't say I won't give you a heaping one and I'll charge you less. V'yivchis min adam. Eliminated k'minig haMedina. There's an Indian that everyone should do the regular thing of minig haMedina. Memela, everyone does the same. If everyone does the same, so it comes out there won't be any mistakes. So al derech zeh, the shekel eseritim. It's not only because you'll get more, because everyone should have the regular minig. Halacha Yud Zayin. Bnei Medina shiratzu lehesev al hamidas al hamishkalos. They want to decide that by them the midas are larger midas or larger weights. Is leyisifu yaser al ashtus. They shouldn't be add more than a shtus, which means shem hoyakav. He gives an example. Hoyakav mechel chamisha. If the kav was something that contained 5 of a certain measurement, and v'asu mechel shisha, they decided that from now on a kav should mean something which contains 6 of originally it was 5 and now it's 6. So it's basically it's a 6th milbar. It's a 6th milbar. And as you added 1, which was originally a 5th of what was there, it's a 5th milgav, but it's a shishis milbar. So it should be other. They could do that. But yes, al shisha leyasu. And the concern is because people may come and sell them schera, and they're selling them schera. Let's say they're selling them a kav of something. They're charging per kav a certain amount of money. Now they're used to a kav, meaning a kav which is 5, and they're expecting the money for 5 of that measurement. Lepel, they end up giving a 6 of that measurement, so really they're losing. They're giving schera a 6th more, and they're getting paid only for a 5th, for 5/6 of what they gave. And lepel, so they're losing. So they don't want them to lose that much money. So memela, if they're only going to lose a 6th, whereas they basically gave a 6th more schera, and they should have gotten paid like a 6th more. So memela, so that's not so gefährlich because their profit margin is anyways a 6th. So at the very worst, they're going to lose their profit. Mashenkin, if you're going to add, let's say 2, so you're going to add it was from 5 and now they made it 7, so you're going to end up giving 7 and they're being paid for 5, so they're going to be losing money. So therefore they Chacham instituted, you shouldn't be mesev al hamishkalos, at the very most a 6 milbar, which means a 5th milgav. Halacha Yudches. Hasiton is like a wholesaler that sells to retailers. The mekanech is mideisav achel l'shishim, even though he sells a lot, but he doesn't sell so often because he just he doesn't sell to people. He sells to retailers. So therefore, he has to make sure to clean his midos, his measuring utensils, every 30 days. So it shouldn't be left anything. Mele, if things are left, so mele it doesn't get full. Ubalabayas, a person that's a balabayas that sells things, which he also sells not so often, is achal shnei maser chedesh, once every 12 months. Abavachenveni, someone that's a storekeeper which constantly sells, is mekancham pamayim b'Shabbos. So he has to wash, he has to wipe the midos twice in Shabbos, umemacha mishkaleisa pam achas b'Shabbos, and he has to wash. In other words, the measurements he washes, he wipes mikaneach pamayim b'Shabbos. He doesn't have to wash it. Masha'ekin mishkaleisa, which is his measuring items, which he may touch when his hands are wet and his hands are full of oil, so he should wash those weights once a week. Umekaneach miznayim, and he should wipe the miznayim, the scale. I'll call mishkal mishkal every time he does a weighing. He weighs something. He should wipe the weights. He should wipe the weights. Kedei sheleach lidu, so they shouldn't become rusty, and they shouldn't lose their accuracy. They shouldn't lose their accuracy. But kids, these are the rules of how a person has to maintain that his weights and his measurement sticks and his measuring cups should all be right. So Nachamo, Asita, and so as a wholesaler, he has to wipe out his measuring cups every 30 days. A Balabayas every 12 months. A Chenveni has to do it twice a week, but he also has to wash his weights once a week, and he has to wash the actual scale. He has to wipe the actual scale after every time he weighs, because things pour over, memela, so you don't want it to rust. Hamevakish lishkel shleisha revi litra. Person wants to go ahead and buy 3/4 of a litra of something, of meat, let's say. So now the question is, you don't have a weight for shleisha litra. You have a weight for 1 litra, and you have a weight for half a litra, and you have a weight for 1/4 of a litra, but you don't have a weight of 3/4. So this is is noita litra bekaf miznayim. So you should take a litra on the weight of a litra on one side. Now this person only wants 3/4 of a litra of something. V'habasar urevi a litra bekaf shnayim. So in other words, you're selling someone. So the meicher puts a litra on one side, his weight of a litra on one side, and then he goes on the other side and he puts the meat plus 1/4 of a litra of a weight. So memela, this person is only getting 3/4 of a litra, because on this side there's meat plus 1/4 of a litra. So that's going to come to equal out the litra which is on the other side. So he's going to end up having 3/4 of a litra of meat. Now l'chura, there's another eitzah. The other eitzah is, instead of taking a litra and putting on the other side meat plus 1/4 of a litra, take a half a litra plus 1/4 of a litra on one pan, and then put the meat on the other pan. So you'll have 3/4 of the litra, which is comprised of a half a litra and 1/4 of a litra, and plus meats. He says, no, Shemata Eimer, Neisel Chatzi litra, or Revi litra b'kaf achas. If you give me the other eights of putting 1/4 and a half on one and the other side meat, Shema Yipol Revi litra. We're concerned that maybe the Revi litra will fall off. And really he's going to end up getting on a half a litra. He thinks he's getting 3/4 of a litra. So if you put the 1/4 of the litra on the other side, so obviously the meicher is going to make sure that 1/4 of a litra is there. Because if that 1/4 of a litra falls off, he's going to end up getting a whole litra and not 3/4 of a litra. Halacha Chaf. Chayav bezn lahamid sheitrim b'chol medina medina u'chol plach u'plach sheyu mechazin ala chanuyes u'mitzatkin es hamiznayim es hamides. They should go around the stores and make sure that the scales and the measuring cups should be right. Upeskin ha'sha'arim, and they also make up the prices. Halacha Chaf. Chayav bezn lahamid sheitrim b'chol medina medina u'b'chol plach u'plach. Person Bezin has to set up shaitrim in each Medina has to have a shaitir, and each plach or plach, each county. She mechazrin al chanuyes umetzatkenes hamiznayim vesamides upeskin hasharim. They should check all the measurements and all the weights and all the scales, and also make up the prices. Certain things they make up the prices, that the price should be a proper price. It shouldn't be overpriced. V'chol mi shenimtzeim. They were talking about things devarim shaleichel nefesh. Someone has an improper weight, an improper measuring bowl, or improper scale. They could even hit him, or the consent to give him a knas. Someone who knows they set up a price and set up a price for certain items, and this person is mafkiyas hashar. he's like breaking the price. Or mecher b'yeker, he's selling things for more expensive. Because people need it. So he's selling it for more expensive. Is also makanese and v'kefanese or mecher kishar hashuk. And they force him to sell it kishar hashuk. I don't know what does it mean when it says b'chol medina medina b'chol plach plach. B'chol medina medina is l'chura a larger area. Plach plach means like a group of cities. B'chol medina medina is in each medina there's plochim. That's l'chura what it says in Hilchos Lamed. So l'chura, I mean, you have set up bezin lahamet sheitim. Now those sheitim they go around. They go to. So what's pasuk saying b'chol medina? There were medina dika sheitim. There were memuna on the whole medina, and then there were plach dika sheitim. So like. There were those shaitim that went around mitam Medina, maybe they came less often, and those that came mitam plach, which came more often. I'm not sure what does it mean. B'chol Medina, b'chol plach. But when you have a bezin, b'chol Medina, and then you have another bezin b'chol plach. So you have a more closed dika bezin and a pratis dika bezin. When you're talking about shaitim that are going around to the stores and to test things, so what does it mean b'chol Medina, b'chol plach?